What if I told you that the world's most dangerous conflict in 2026 isn't happening on a battlefield? It's happening in trade ministries, boardrooms, and cargo ports. Across the globe, governments have discovered something new, that economics is a weapon, and they are using it. The World Economic Forum surveys over 1,000 of the world's top leaders, economists, and risk experts every year. They ask one simple question: what is the risk most likely to trigger a global crisis? This year, for the first time in the report's history, the answer wasn't war. It wasn't a pandemic. It wasn't climate change. It was trade. Welcome to the age of geoeconomic confrontation, the world's #1 global risk and the subject of today's Fact Voyage. So what exactly is geoeconomic confrontation? In simple terms, it's when countries use economic tools, things like tariffs, sanctions, export bans, and investment restrictions, not to grow their economies, but as weapons in a geopolitical power struggle. It's the moment trade policy stops being about commerce and starts being about control. Think of it this way. Every country has a toolbox. Inside that toolbox, you'd normally find things like import duties to protect local industries, or sanctions, financial penalties to pressure bad actors, or rules about who can invest in your country. These are legitimate economic tools. They've existed for decades, but something has changed. Governments are no longer reaching into that toolbox to fix economic problems. They're reaching in to win political battles, to punish rivals, to gain leverage, to reshape the global order in their favor. The tools haven't changed. The intent has. And that shift from economic management to economic warfare is what the World Economic Forum is warning us about. Now, how big is this really? The World Economic Forum publishes its Global Risks Report every January. The 2026 edition surveyed over 1,300 global leaders, economists, and risk experts, and the results were striking. 18% of respondents named geoeconomic confrontation as the single risk most likely to trigger a material global crisis in 2026. That made it #1. Above armed conflict, above extreme weather, above misinformation. But here's what makes that number truly alarming. This risk didn't arrive at #1 gradually. It jumped 8 positions in a single year. 1 year ago, geoeconomic confrontation sat at #8 on this list. 12 months later, #1. That is not a trend. That is a warning signal. And it's not just the ranking, it's the outlook. Over 50% of the experts surveyed now expect the global environment over the next 2 years to be turbulent or stormy. Only 1% anticipate calm. Let that settle for a moment. These are the people who study global risk for a living, the economists, the strategists, the policymakers, and 99% of them are not expecting calm. There is one more number worth understanding. When asked about the next 10 years, not just 2026, but the decade ahead, 68% of respondents said they expect the global political environment to become multipolar or fragmented, a world where no single power sets the rules, where major blocs compete, clash, and enforce their own norms. That is the world that geoeconomic confrontation is building toward. So how does this actually work in the real world? Let's break it down. Geoeconomic confrontation has 4 primary weapons, and every major power is using all of them. Weapon 1. Tariff escalation. A tariff is simply a tax on imported goods. For most of modern history, tariffs were used carefully to protect specific industries, to comply with trade agreements, to level competitive playing fields. That restraint is gone. The United States applied sweeping import duties, first targeting China with rates that reached 60% on certain goods, then rolling out universal tariffs of 10 to 20% on imports from across the globe, not to fix a trade imbalance, but to force geopolitical concessions, to reshape who manufactures what and where. Entire supply chains, built over decades, had to be rerouted. overnight. Weapon 2 is export controls. This one is quieter, but it may be more dangerous. China controls the overwhelming majority of the world's rare earth minerals, lithium, cobalt, the rare earth magnets that go into electric vehicles, military missiles, wind turbines, and smartphones. In late 2025, Beijing rolled out a sweeping new export control regime. It didn't just restrict the minerals themselves, it restricted the processing technology, the knowledge, the supply chain infrastructure. With one policy move, China demonstrated it could bring large segments of the global economy to a standstill, and the world took notice. Weapon 3 is sector sanctions. Sanctions used to target individuals, a corrupt official, a rogue state leader, an arms dealer. Not anymore. Entire industries are now being sanctioned. The sectors currently targeted include artificial intelligence, semiconductors, biotechnology, quantum computing, drones, rare earth processing. The list of industries considered strategic and therefore subject to restriction is growing every single year. Think about what that means. If the foundational technologies of the 21st century, AI, chips, quantum, become geopolitical battlegrounds, the entire innovation economy fractures along political lines. Weapon 4 is investment screening. Governments are now actively blocking the flow of capital into industries they consider sensitive. The United States reviews and restricts American investment into Chinese technology sectors. Europe is building its own investment screening regime. Countries are building walls not just around their goods, but around their money. Capital itself has become a geopolitical front line. 4 weapons, all being used simultaneously by multiple major powers, and the world's trading system, designed for cooperation, was never built to withstand this. Here's the part that should worry you. We've gotten used to tariffs. They feel almost normal now. A headline, a market dip, a political talking point, and then life goes on. But the World Economic Forum warns there is a much darker path ahead, a full-scale economic war. Not just tariffs. Think port blockades, ships turned away from harbors. Think canceled contracts, deals voided overnight for political reasons. Think capital controls, governments freezing the movement of money across borders. These are not hypothetical scenarios. These are the next rungs on the escalation ladder, and we are already climbing it. And here is the most dangerous part. Geoeconomic confrontation does not stay contained. It pulls in supply chains, making the goods you buy more expensive and harder to source. It feeds inflation because trade barriers raise prices. It compounds debt because governments spending on industrial subsidies and defense are not spending on economic stability. It deepens inequality because the cost of economic war is not shared equally. The bottom 50% absorbs the price rises. And it escalates toward armed conflict because the line between economic war and military confrontation is thinner than most people realize. The report puts it plainly. The dangerous combination of mounting debt, geoeconomic confrontation, and the risk of an asset bubble burst could destabilize not just businesses, but entire societies. We are not watching a trade dispute. We are watching a structural shift in how the world works. You might be thinking, this is a story about the United States and China, 2 giants, far away from most people's daily lives. It isn't. 16 countries across the globe now list geoeconomic confrontation in their top 5 national risks. Not major powers, 16 countries of all sizes, on every continent, from every income bracket. Export-oriented economies, countries whose growth depends on selling goods to the world, are especially exposed. When the rules of global trade become unpredictable, the countries most integrated into global supply chains suffer most. And smaller nations face a particularly uncomfortable reality. Countries that don't align clearly with either the United States or China are increasingly being pressured to comply with sanctions regimes they didn't choose, to pick a side in a conflict they didn't start, to restructure trade relationships built over generations because 2 superpowers decided the rules had changed. And there is no longer a neutral referee. The World Trade Organization, the body designed to resolve exactly these kinds of disputes, is being sidelined. The number of cases brought to the WTO's dispute system has fallen to roughly 1/3 of the level recorded before its key dispute body was effectively disabled in 2019. Without a referee, the strongest players make the rules, and the rules they are making are not designed to benefit everyone. The world isn't splitting along military lines first. It's splitting along economic ones. Trade, capital, technology, and natural resources, the four pillars of the modern economy, are all becoming battlegrounds, not by accident, by design, by deliberate policy choice. The question isn't whether geoeconomic confrontation will shape the next decade. It already is. The question is, which side of these divides will your country end up on? Your industry? Your livelihood? That's not a question with an easy answer, but it is a question every one of us, as citizens, workers, consumers, and voters, needs to start thinking about. That's what we're here to unpack on Fact Voyage. One story at a time, one voyage at a time. If this gave you something to think about, subscribe, because the next video dives into the fuel behind all of this, the global race for critical minerals, and why China's grip on rare earths might be the most consequential geopolitical advantage of the 21st century. See you on the next voyage.